Yeah. So I'm going to talk about forms. You're too quiet, even for AngularNYC. I'm going to talk about forms. Woo! Yeah! Yeah, which is the most exciting thing when you're building an app. Yeah? Who like forms? Who really like forms? Yeah, woo! Yeah. No. So that's me. This is me. That picture of me. I'm working at a company named 500 Tech. And I'm a GDE for Angular. I'm working with Angular, I think, since 2010. That's the reason I'm wearing this hat. I'm also a professional violin player on my free time. And I'm organized another great group, which calls React NYC, which you're all welcome to check out because we're talking about a bunch of things which not always specifically related to React. So if you like to learn about other web technologies, you're welcome to check it out. All right, cool. Yeah, what else? So, as I said, I'm a front-end developer. I'm working with a bunch of tools. I'm working with Angular. Recently, I'm working with React, but it doesn't really matter because each one of the solutions out there got its pros and cons. Specifically, Angular is better with forms. Angular love forms. I like forms. I wrote a book about forms, which all of you are gonna get for free. I'm gonna send you a link right after my talk. So yeah, I've got a tattoo with form control on it. So if you want to check it out on the Hangout, I'm gonna show it to you. All right, it's right here. Just code of conduct. I can do it in Google. This is the form control street in Italy. It's a street that was named after Angular Forms module. You're not taking it too seriously, I hope so, yeah? And this is the Form Festival in Japan, where they celebrate the Forms module in Angular. But now that we're all excited, all right, yeah. So, yeah. We've got two options. It's really up to you. I've got a bunch of slides. Most of them is not going to teach you anything. It's going to be like a bunch of silly jokes. Or we're going to try to build, to do some very risky live coding. So who's for funny slides with no meaning? Raise your hand. Just you. Yeah? Who's for live coding? That's it? Yeah, all right, cool. Boo. Don't do it. Maybe I'm going to fail hard and it's going to be funny. No? All right. So, yeah. It's going to be like, the theme is going to be Christmas. I think you got it. So what's the plan? Who builds, any kind of forms with the reactive forms module? Who built the form? All the rest of the people who didn't raise their hand, you never build a form with Angular? It's just important for me to know so I can adjust the level. All right, that's interesting. All right, so let's try to keep it simple. We're going to try to build a configuration dynamic driven forms, which sounds exciting, but basically what it's going to be like, I'm going to try to build a form that is dynamically rendered in a response for a JSON. It's kind of system that I used to build when I worked with companies that have a bunch of forms. And you need to generate a lot of different forms. And you want to spare all the boilerplate and write tons of code repeating yourself and trying to manage those kinds of monsters. So the solution is, let's just describe our form as a JSON, and let's build the most tiny form renderer, whatever you want to call it, that can consume this JSON and just dynamically rendered form controls. Make sense? Cool. So let's see how much time I get. All right. I think I'm going to start from the most simple component. I'm using a WebStorm IDE, so all those shortcuts that you see, it's the WebStorm integration. I'm going to generate a component. Who's clapping for WebStorm? I don't have any free license today, so don't clap. You're not going to get nothing. I'm going to create a module. All right. Let's call this module dynamic form. Now you're a bunch of Angular developers, and it's going to be like a true live coding. So if you see a mistake, like in a, while I'm coding, please let me know. It's going to spare us a lot of time. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Let's try it again. I just drank too much water, and yeah. All right. Dynamic, we got it? Dynamic form. It's going to be our dynamic form module. The CLI is not going to help me with this one. I'm going to import it into my app module. So let's take the dynamic form module that we just created. And I'm going to start with generating an interface. Let's call this interface control config. You can generate interfaces with the CLI if you're really lazy. And because we're gonna render dynamic control, we want to have like basically everything dynamic. So the type of the control should be dynamic. We're gonna pass it as a string. We're gonna have a name. Basically, it's a string label. And it's going to be a very basic example, but you can take it further. You can include like whatever you like. You're going to build an object that describes the form. So you can put validators right here. You can put some metadata, whatever you want. Make sense? Placeholder. Not now. You know what? After I finish this one, if we'll get some more spare time, we're going to try to do something interesting. So now I've got this dynamic, this control configuration object. I'm going to go back to my dynamic form module. And I'm going to generate a component. Let's call this component dynamic, almost, dynamic control. I'm going to pass some flags. I want it to be flat. I don't want any test on this one. So it's going to be false. Inline styles, inline templates. And I want to export. Inline where?
Template slice.
What?
Inline template, inline template. One should be style.
When you do it twice, it's converted to styles. That's things that most of Angular developers don't know about. It's very advanced. So yeah, you can type styles, whatever you like. But if you're a pro, you don't do it. I'm going to export this. You know what? Let's keep it like this. So I've got my dynamic control component right here. Inside my module, and who's done some dynamic component rendering before? Raise your hand. Almost no one. It's dark, I can't really see you, but you can raise your hand if you like. If you're going to dynamic render a component in Angular, that's not enough just to declare the component right here. You need to create another array named entry components and include your component. If you want to read about it, that's the way you do it. Otherwise, you're going to get an exception. Angular needs to know that this component is going to be rendered dynamically. Cool. So I've got this dynamic control. What's going to be here? It's going to be a form control. So I'm going to create a template for it. I'm using Bootstrap because I think Bootstrap is great, and I'm not afraid to say it. So it's going to be class. The name of the class is going to be form group. Just a bunch of CSS, nothing to do with Angular, all right? I'm going to create a label here. I'm going to create, of course, an input. The class is going to be a form control. And this is the dynamic control component, which means that you should pass me as an input, you should pass me some control config. The type going to be control config. So I can take this control config and render this thing dynamically. So the label going to be whatever I've got in the control. So I've got a label. The type going to be whatever you pass in the control. So it's going to be the type. What else? Oh, the form control name. It's going to be whatever. Yeah, I'm trying to talk and code, which is against nature, against man nature. Anyway. And as you see, you can pass whatever you like. So someone said placeholder, pass a placeholder. You want to, I don't know, pass some random classes, do whatever you like, all right? Look at this code. Does this make sense? Everyone is like feeling comfortable with this one? Pretty straightforward Angular, all right? Nothing very advanced right now. Another thing, if you're building a form in Angular and you're using the reactive form module, so you can just use form control name and pass a name and try to render some form controls. You're going to get an exception. Because if you want to use this directive, this form control name, it must be in the context of a form, of ng form directive. It has to be inside of a form group. So this component should get from the outside a form group. The type going to be form group. And the wrapper div going to get a form group dynamically. And we're done with this. The reason is that, no, that's not going to happen. You're sleeping, Rama. I'm moving, and you're like, where was I? All right. This directive going to look for an instance of a form group. All right? Next time I'm going to bring a laser pointer or something. Next, simple component, simple Angular. Let's move forward. So we've got a dynamic control. Now we need to build a component that knows how to render this dynamic control. So I'm going to create another component. Let's call this component dynamic form. Again, I'm going to pass a bunch of flags. Inline templates, spec going to be false. You don't have to do it. You can just like hard code this in Angular config. You don't need to repeat those flags if that's what you're trying to achieve. It's going to be flat, and I'm going to export this from the module. I missed something? Maybe, I don't know. Dynamic form, it looks okay to me. Let's look at the module. Here's my dynamic form component right here. Here's its exports, so it looks good to me. All right? Next, the dynamic form component. It's going to render a form. You're going to pass a configuration, just a JSON, and this component is going to read this configuration and dynamically create form controls. Make sense? Some preparations. So it's going to be a form here, of course, without any content. So I'm going to put just a placeholder, the ng container. I'm going to take a reference for it. I'm going to call this reference an entry, because right here I'm going to render dynamically some components. The button, the submit button, currently I'm going to put it like hard-coded. So submit. Let's make it pretty. So it's going to be a btn and btn primary. And let's start to see which classes, which dependencies I need to be able to read configuration and render dynamic controls. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a reference to this container. So I'm going to use viewChild. I'm going to grab the entry. Now, who wants to answer which type I'm going to get back if I'm doing a viewChild call? If I'm like trying to grab the entry, what's the type of this? The person who's going to answer this is going to get a prize. No one?
Something entity.
Something entity. What's going to be the type of entry? Element ref? Who said element ref? Cool. Fresh bottle of water. We don't have too much of them. Believe me, that's a great price. You're going to be thirsty. Sorry, I'm not part of the organizers, but you can claim your prices after it from one of the organizers. Tell them that Nir sent you. All right, cool. So I don't need an element reference. I need something called view container ref. A view container ref is a special type that knows how to act as an entry point for dynamic components. So to be able to do this, I'm going to use view child, but with this special syntax that says I'm going to read this element ref as a view container ref. This is kind of casting. So I've got a reference for this one, which is good. Next, this is the dynamic form, which means that you're going to pass me some configuration so I'll be able to read them and render my form. So as an input, I'm expecting an array of controls. The type going to be control config array. All right? Next, this component is a form. I'm going to create the basic form right here. Let's create just a form group. It's going to be equals to new form group. The reason I'm doing it, because I'm going to wrap all the dynamic content with a form. And a form in Angular should be binded to a form group. The reason for this, each one of those controls that I'm going to render here, going to register themselves on the parent. Next, I have to pass an object. I'm creating a group, so I'm going to pass an empty object. Let's see if we've got everything we need. One last thing, if you're going to render a component dynamically, you need a utility class from Angular. It's called Component Factory Resolver. It looks like this. So this class is going to help me render my control dynamically. This is creating the container. I'm going to get configs from outside. I'm gonna transmit an event, a custom event, when you submit the form. Let's call this handle submit. It's going to be a new event emitter. Yeah, that's a bunch of stuff, but the good thing about it, that once you get it, once you learn it, I'm going to write this code only once, and that's it. And I can theoretically generate like endless, I forgot a word for this, permutations of forms. So handle submit. When this form going to submit it, let's catch the event, the ng submit. And we're going to point it to handle, submit, emit, and we're going to emit the entire form group values. Now, if you look at this code, I know there's a lot of information if you haven't done any dynamic rendering, but if you look carefully, it's not that complicated. Most of those things are basic APIs. I think the only exception is going to be this component factory resolver if you never worked with this. But the rest of the API is to query the template with viewChild, getting some inputs and outputs, and basically that's it, and basic forms API. All right? We're done with the template. I've got a form that's going to wrap something that's going to be rendered dynamically, and I'm done with the template. Let's move forward. Now, if I was building a system that just read, get a configuration from the server, calling an NPI endpoint, grabbing some JSONs and rendering a form, and that's it, I can just do it inside an onInit lifecycle method and just do all the important stuff right here, right now. But because I'm building a demo, and I might have like an extra 5 minutes, I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to implement on changes because I want to do this. Every time the input is going to change, every time you're going to feed me with a new array, new controls, new configuration, I want to build a form. In this way, I can actually, in real time, can create a form dynamically. Just push new configuration into this array. The dynamic form component going to listen to changes and render the form. So right here inside ng on changes, if I've got configs, if I've got controls, this controls. If I've got controls, I can check it like this, or if I just got controls. These controls that you're gonna handle me. Now I can dynamically render the form, and this is the most important lines of code. All right, this is like the advanced stuff. So I've got controls. Great. Controls is an array of control config. Good. I'm going to take these controls and I'm going to loop over them. And for each control, I want to render this dynamic form control. Remember it? This one. Dynamic control component for each configuration. So let's see how we can do it. First, I'm going to take this group, this wrapper, and I'm going to register the new control. It's going to look like this. Take this form group, this group that wraps everything, this one, and add a new control. Add control. This is the reactives forms module API. You can just add controls with code. It doesn't mean that a new control is going to appear on your template, but it does mean that this object, this form group, now contains an instance of a new control. So add control. Here, remember, this is a config. Yeah, this is a control config. So I'm going to take the name from it. The name going to be whatever name there is there, and the value going to be an instance of a form control. So for each control, first take this group, create a new form control instance, and just add it to the group. Next, now I want to add something to my template. So now I'm going to use this helper. I'm going to create something that we call a factory, which means that I'm going to take this component factory resolver. I'm going to use this method, resolve component factory. I'm going to handle you a component, just the component class, and you're gonna return me a factory that's going to help me create instances of this component. So here I'm going to pass my dynamic control component. So I've got a factory, and when you've got a factory, you can produce a bunch of components. That's the reason it's called a factory.
Shouldn't this be outside of the scope of the for each?
No.
Okay then.
It can. It can be. All right? And you know what? Maybe it should be, because I don't want to create. Yeah, you're right. Great tip. Let's put it right here, right? Because once you create a factory, you don't really need to create a factory again and again and again on each iteration. Factory is a factory. It can create different instances. Thank you for the tip. I don't have any prices for you, like I said before.
What good are you?
Nothing. I'm just useless. But, it's a Thanksgiving meetup, so let's keep it like holiday spirit. Don't worry. I just got a tip from the meetup organizers. Because we are too early, we still got a little bit of time to walk through the code and make sure that everyone understands. I mean, it's up to you. Otherwise, if you're in a hurry, so we can wrap it up right now. Keep going. Yeah. Yeah, live coding. All right. Let's see what we've got. So for each configuration, first take the form group, add a control. Great. Next, you've got a factory right here in your hand, which means you can create dynamic controls. Let's do it. Let's take this entry point right here. So it's going to be this entry, I've got a method create component. It couldn't be more like obvious what it's going to do. All right, create component. Ask for a component factory. Give me a component factory. I'm gonna create an instance for you. Great, I've got one. It's right here. This factory. All right. I'm gonna call it control factory, so it's gonna be obvious because after this live session, if everything is gonna be okay, I'm gonna share this code with you. I'm not gonna share this code with you. I lied. Next, control config. So now I've got a component. I've got a control component. All right? What? What? Factory. So control factory. Great. Now, if you remember this, this dynamic control look, we said that we're going to get an input. All right? An input. We want to get a group, and we're going to get a control. But I'm not using this component inside of a template. So I can't just pass properties to it. Does it make sense? But because now we're doing everything by code, if you created a component, you can get a reference to the instance. So I'm going to take this control component that I just created. I'm going to ask for the instance, and here I've got both the group and the control. So I'm going to pass a group. I'm going to do it in a second. And I'm going to pass a control. In other words, I'm going to initialize those directly. Give me a reference to the instance. I've got a group. I've got a control. Here you go. All right? So technically, you don't even need those inputs because no one's going to use it. You're just taking two properties of the class and initialize those. Make sense? I don't need those. No one's going to pass it as an input. So the group going to be this group that wraps everything. So I'm going to pass this form group. And the control going to be this one, control config, the configuration. Control config. The last thing I want to do here is because this code going to run every time the configuration going to change. So every time I'm going to pass a new array of controls, this code going to regenerate a form. And I don't want any duplications. So before this code is going to run again, I'm going to clear the entry point. Now I'm going to stop for a second. We're going to walk through the code line by line, and then we're going to see if it's going to work or going to fail.
What about the form group?
What about the form group? Here. This one, what about it?
Shouldn't you remove the controls from there as well?
Yeah. No, I don't know. Why? I'm going to create a new one.
It's garbage.
Yeah, but it's JavaScript. It's all garbage. I'm kidding. Look, I'm kidding, Babu, but I'm gonna answer seriously. All right. I'm gonna build here, like you see, it's gonna be like a very tough live coding session, fast and dirty. Of course, in a real production code, and I build those kind of system, you're gonna take care of each and every line. You're gonna make sure that you're passing the right types, that you're checking yourself, that you're not to write some robust code. So, of course, you write, and if you look carefully, you can find a bunch of other stuff that it's not considered to be a best practice. But if you mention this, and that's the only thing that I'm going to mention about this, you've got a very rich API. So if you can add a control like we did right here, you should accept. You should know that you've got a bunch of other methods. One of them is obviously going to be remove control, or set validators, or clear validators, or disable, or enable. So you can do, like, you've got a bunch of methods, so you can pass whatever config you want to pass here, and just do with this instance whatever you like. All right?
Can I have the control factory be defined in the constructor as a private member?
Yeah, yeah.
I can, okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure that the
Yeah,
dynamic
stop disturbing me, please.
control-
No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But yes. Like I said, you can see we can do another iteration and clean it up. All right. Let's walk like line by line. The template, I think it's straightforward. Let's create a form. Let's create an instance of a form group, and let's wrap everything with this form group. All right. There is no content. I'm using ng container, which is a dummy component. It's not going to render into the DOM. It's just a placeholder. I'm using this placeholder as an entry point, so I can render a new instance of components and just, I've got some reference. That's it. That's the template, all right? A form, the basic API. I'm going to pass a form group and catch the ng submit. When I catch this ng submit, I'm just going to fire it up. Next, inside the code, again, I'm taking a reference to this entry point. I'm making sure that Angular understands that I want to treat this element, this special element, not as an element ref. I want to treat it as a view container ref, which is a different kind which is a different type of within Angular, which has a method named where is it? Create component. All right. Input output. I'm creating the instance of the form group. Again, I can do it in the constructor. I'm injecting this utility so I can actually create a factory out of component that doesn't exist on the template. And then every time this array of controls is going to change, I'm going to run this code. ng on changes, just listening to changes. And I'm going to clear the entry. All right. I'm creating a control factory from this dynamic control component, so now I can create multiple instances. I'm looping over the controls, which is an array of configuration, and for each configuration, I'm going to create a new instance of form control and add it to the form group. Then I'm going to create a component with this helper. Where is it? Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we created it right here. Then I'm going to use the entry to actually create a component, and this line of code is going to render the component to the template. And then, because I've got a reference to this component, I can initialize his members directly. All right? We're done with this. So we've got a very complicated component that uses a dynamic component and knows how to render it. Take it a step forward and create some bunch of dynamic controls from some kinds of types to keep it quiet. To shout, what does it mean? But you just, all right, sorry. I'm very aware of what's going on. I'm going to shut up right now. Next, guys, let's see if we did a good work with this one. I'm going to go back to my app component. And now inside this Santa form templates, I see I've got a bunch of, we're gonna fix it. Yeah. Here I'm gonna use the app dynamic form. I'm gonna pass this form a bunch of controls, and I'm gonna catch the handle submit. This should be like the final, the actual like putting it into action. All right. So that's what I'm gonna do. Let's create a bunch of controls. So here I've already got add config. Let's remove this. I've got this handle submit. We're gonna log it to the console. These controls, let's initialize this with, I don't know, let's put a type here. And the type gonna be text. Wait a second, I think I've got an issue right here. Yeah. Control config. All right. So the type gonna be text. Let's put a label. We call this first name, and the name of the field gonna be f name. All right. So I've got an array, I've got one control here. I'm going to pass it to my dynamic forms. When someone hits submit, I'm going to call this method, just handle submit right here, and pass the data. Up, almost. Now, like every live coding, we've got a bunch of errors. Let's fix them and learn from them, and we can wrap everything up. All right. First one. Can't bind to form group since it's not a known property of a div. It happens when we try to assign class form group, and pass a group. Excuse me? Excuse me? Where? Let's go to the dynamic form control, and he's got a problem with this form group. He said, I don't know what it is. So I think that I forgot, yeah, right here, I didn't import the reactives for module from Angular. So Angular don't know what it is. You look at this directive and said, all right, what it is. I'm not familiar with this one. Please import the module. Makes sense. All right. I think we've got something here. Yeah. Cool. You don't need to appreciate a very complicated live coding. Just get it through. So it is working, but just to make sure it works, what I want to do this. I wanna try to fill something here. Hit submit. It doesn't matter. And just to see that the forms is actually working. All right. All right. I've got like 2 minutes. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna delete this one. I'm gonna delete all of this. And just before the let's do this. Just before the meetup started, I did this live coding and saved a final results right here, this app. So I'm just trying to do, wait a second, be patient, you're gonna like it. I'm gonna take everything inside this app. I'm going to throw this inside my project. All right. Now the code is exactly the same as you've seen. There's, I didn't put like something that you haven't saw. So you've got this dynamic form and the dynamic control, the exact same code. The only difference is that I created a form that's going to create this form on runtime. So we're going to fix this import, and we're done. Dynamic control, yes, module not found, cannot resolve, yeah. So I'm going to go to my app module. I'm going to check the imports, seems to be okay. Form builder, seems to be okay. Form module, seems to be okay. Maybe I just need to restart the server because I did a bunch of like copy paste right now. Now let's give it a try. I'm just gonna go out of presentation mode for a second, go back to presentation mode, try to grab the thingy right here. Let's hope for good. Come on. It's very specific. In app component, you can't find the module dynamic form type. So let's fix it. And you couldn't find this one. That's it. So the control config is missing. Let's let WebStorm to re-import it. Where did I use this? Right here. And hopefully, yep. So let's see what we've got here. Wait a second. All right, this is going to be very cool. So I built a form that's going to generate the JSON and going to generate a form. So it's basically a form that creates a form. Text, the type going to be text, it's going to be name, it's going to be the label going to be your name. Cool. Let's try to set a date. It's going to be date of birth. The label is going to be DOP, so it's a date, which working, hopefully, yes. And I don't know, just for the fun of it, let's create a range. The name going to be, I don't know, a range, maybe. And range, and it's working. And now I'm trying to like putting my name. I'm going to lie about my date of birth because I'm much older than it looks like. All right, let's forget about it. Going to play with the range and going to hit the submit button, and I've got everything right here. So what you're seeing here, think about, and this is a true story. I grew up in the country. No, I'm kidding. A true story. We once built an editor that enables a bunch of guys that doesn't know anything about coding this interface, form for creating forms. While they're creating the forms, it's going to send to a real-time server like Firebase or whatever, right? This JSON, which generating in real time and pushing new forms to another system. So you've got this code on GitHub. I'm going to share the link with you. That's not the right link. Don't take pictures of this, all right? You can get my book for free on this URL, linkpub.com, Angular Forms. I made it free specially for you guys, for this meetup. And if you want to keep in touch, you're welcome to follow me on Twitter, to send me a bunch of emails, or just stay here and let's hang out in this whatever we're going to. Anyway, hope you learned at least who learned something new in this session. Just quick checkup. All right, cool. Thank you very much. And Anya, you want to wrap it up? Of course.